The world is watching with their ears.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're CyberEars.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
Jeff Ritzman.
Jeremy Vaney.
It is the last show of the year.
That's right. 2010 will be but a memory very soon.
A memory of butt.
Of oil spills.
Who remembers that? You know, it's funny. I just saw Fair Game, the movie Fair Game, which is all about the Valerie Plame, the outing of the CIA agent Valerie Plame. And it's just... so much crime has been committed in the last decade that who even remembers? You know what I mean?
Well, I guarantee you.
I guess we need these movies to hone in on specific crimes so that we can remember what the hell happened.
Right. Well, I'm sure the fish and pelicans remember.
Well,
they're still choking down the oil.
That's a whole other crime. I think the real crime is that Obama decided not to investigate anything that happened ever. Let's just move on and let the criminals free. Great.
Well, I stay away from politics. That's right. Yeah, I'll stay away from that.
So last week we did sort of a year in review-ish of topics, and this week we're doing sort of a year in review-ish of general subject matter that we've covered on this show. So it should be interesting when Micah Hanks, who... this is his first time on the show.
Yes.
And he just wrote a book that I have yet to read, although I have it on good authority that it is a good book, called Magic, Mysticism, and the Mushroom Men. Is that what it's called? That's a joke. Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule.
That's right.
Which produces Mushroom Men.
The Mushroom Men, yes.
So that'll be fun. Do we... have anything that we want to cover before we get to Micah?
I don't think so. Not as of yet.
All right. Do we want
anything you wanted to cover? Or?
No, I don't know. I didn't know if we should be talking about Paratopia quarterly or not, which is coming upon us somewhat soon.
End of January. Well, we got most of the content together. It's just it's all a matter of layout right now. Yeah, well, I mean, we're towards the end of January. We'll talk more about that as time grows closer. But it's, I'll tell you what, it's shaping up to be a pretty amazing first issue.
Yes.
Really. I mean, we've really come into some good stuff, good writers, good content. So I think everybody will be very pleased.
Could we say that we're finishing the job that we started?
I think that might be safe to say.
All right, we're finishing, and if we're talking, we're talking in code here now, but we're finishing the job that we started. We're taking out the garbage.
Well, we are an agenda-driven show, after all.
That's right.
Yeah.
So consider yourself warned, ufology.
Yeah.
When this magazine hits, it's game over for abduction research.
Yeah.
It's already game over, but people just don't know.
I think it already is. Yeah, but yeah.
Apparently, they haven't gotten the news yet, but
it'll trickle through. Don't worry.
Yeah,
it takes a while to get around, but it'll get around.
So we'll let that hang in the air, and you can imagine with your eyes and ears of the soul what we're talking about.
I have a question for the listeners while I'm thinking about it.
Go on.
And this is something I want you guys to take notice of when you're surfing about the net that isn't Paratopia or any of the shows that we may be tenuously connected to. How often do you see any of the hypnosis stuff brought up and questioned and picked apart like we've done here? Are you guys out there surfing about? Obviously, in some ways, we're going to be running almost the same circles. But do you guys notice that this is filtering through a little bit, or are you seeing no evidence that anyone is taking note of it at all? I'm just curious what everyone out there, what your perspective is. Just drop me an email at paratopiapodcast@gmail.com and let me know. I'm curious because God knows I don't get around to many places on the net besides Buff Top Secret and our message board and a couple other places, but I'm sure there's a lot of little nooks and crannies. I'm curious if this is, is it all germinating anywhere else besides this show?
Well, we already know that at least two researchers, and I'll just keep them anonymous because they're going to be on another show soon, but I don't think it's been announced, and I don't know if that's screwing with, that show's schedule. So I'll just say that they say on his show, on this other person's show, that the Emma Woods case just sort of slipped them by because they just figure it's a he said, she said thing. And so, the analogy to me is that now we're at a point with ufology where you can't tell the difference between he said, she said, and a woman yelling rape. Like, even the good people can't tell the difference. A
real issue versus versus just more infighting.
I mean, I don't know. It's disappointing and disgusting.
Well, I mean, and again, I'm not even clear who you're talking about, but I would have to question whoever they are. That how much do you care that you don't even look? I don't know. I mean, it seems like it would be a pretty big issue to me. But that's, I don't know. I would think it'd be a big issue to most people who have an interest in this, at least in that facet of it. I'd be surprised that someone wouldn't find it at least noteworthy.
Well, does this stuff happen all the way through ufology? Like, were there cases of this coming up even in contactee circles or way back when? I mean, if there were, would they just get ignored? I mean, you just get the sense that, like, you just wait 5 or 10 years and this whole Jacobs thing will be wrapped up in a nice sort of trickster bow, and it'll be part of the mythology of ufology. It won't even be that this man's responsible for his own actions or that this even, happened the way it did. The facts be damned. It will just end up part of this mythology of we can't know because we don't know anything in this field. We don't even know if contactees were bullshit, even though we do. Even though we know full well they were bullshit.
Right. Well, I think the problem is and I've talked about this before, is the short-term memory of ufology is like, you could burn down the barn tomorrow and 5 years or even less down the line, you could resurface in this and no one would really, you might get a few call outs, but other than that, you can plow through that. You're back on the fast track. So, I think what at least, Emma's case has going for it is that there's a lot of data. There's a lot of recordings. There's a lot of her writing. There's a lot of all of that. So I think if anybody's looking for something to back up what she says so that it's not a he said, she said type of thing, that would be that,
I would like to know at this point, how can you say, well, I figure it's a he said, she said thing, and so I still haven't looked into it. To me, that implies you believe David Jacobs, because he's the only one saying it's a he said, she said thing. If you actually listen to the tapes instead of listening to him misdirect about how the tapes were edited, then you see very clearly what this is. It's not he said, she said.
Well, I think when it comes to this stuff, again, there is so much infighting. So much. And after a while, the minute that you hear some kind of upheaval, it's just like, in a way I can almost understand it, but this seems to be, the gravity of this seems to be a little bit more important than your garden variety infighting. But there's so much of it. I can almost see from a certain perspective how you go, oh God, not more. I don't. You know what? I don't even. It does. Whatever. I want to look at this. That doesn't. I don't care. I'm sick of hearing all this nonsense going on. But clearly, if you've done even the most cursory look at this, you can tell that there's a little bit more than just infighting going on here for this. I mean, this is it's a pretty big deal when it comes to.
Well, as far as even infighting goes, I mean, can anyone name a time when any experiencer stepped forward and said the hypnosis and all of this stuff is bullshit? I mean, that's not infighting, you know? Like,
No.
how is that even on the surface infighting? It's never happened before, as far as I know.
I don't know. It all depends on how this person got their taste of it, from what direction, from what outlet, talking to whom about what. I mean, it depends on how it came up for them. They may not even know the whole story or what the story even is. I mean, clearly, because I think it would be important enough to look into, at least. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you equate it with infighting. It's all a matter of circumstance. How do you find out about it? Because I'll tell the listeners before you email me, the places that I've looked around, I've never seen it come up, which I'm amazed at, you know, because a lot of places that I go kind of pride themselves on, you know, being the first with a sighting or with a landing trace case or video or whatever. And yet this doesn't seem to pop up, which I find really amazing. And let's not forget that there is, in addition to this short-term memory of this field, there's also this notion of, I've got my ufological hero. I've got my belief system built upon their work. And so to disregard that, I can't acknowledge that, or I'm, you know,
Yeah.
I'm disavowing any of my belief systems. And that's where we've got an even big, that to me is the bigger problem that hypnosis is caused, is it's built a belief system upon, this is what's going on. It's a hybridization program. It's all of those tandem things together. And that's what this is about. And now that the rug has been pulled from out underneath of that. And now where do you go? That's the bigger problem.
Well, it's why. How many times are we going to say now? Where do you go? Because the rug has been pulled out from under all of this so many times. Contactees down the tubes, all of that. You know, secret military bases, secret handshake deals. You know, humans in vats, body parts, and things like that.
Right.
All Richard Doty nonsense. So that's been exposed. Now, alien abduction research via hypnosis. This is being picked apart. So all of everything outside of just the fact that there is this seeming intelligence of some sort interacting with some people,
right,
is gone. Outside of that very vague general concept, it's gone. And as far as UFOs go, I think Jacques Vallée's work and even was it Keith Chester?
Yes.
You know, in showing that the Foo Fighters weren't just blobs, but also, you know, sort of structured craft-looking things in the same way that Jacques Vallée's book has structured craft-looking things. I mean, it sort of takes away the mythology of 1940s, that this all started in the 1940s. You know, we detonated a bomb and that attracted some creatures that didn't like where we were going or whatever. All of that is out the window. Like all of ufology is out the window. We're down to the basics of, we don't know what this is. It's been with us forever. And it's either cloaked in our own cultural contamination or we're cloaking it in cultural contamination or some combination. I mean, the jury's still out on that, I think, but we don't know. We don't know what this is. We're back to we don't know, but we're definitely saying what it isn't. And it isn't any of this X-Files shit. It isn't any of this Space Brothers contactee shit.
Well, there's, again, for all of this stuff, there's what is there, 2 or 3 things that, to me, nail it down. One is belief. The belief that this stuff is based upon. Number 2 is, for a whole nother subset of this culture, if you want to go subculture, is the capital venture of this. Neither of those two are going to come down very easily. Those are pretty big brick walls that people have built up around that. But the third part of it is, luckily, is the subset of people who truly care about what is going on. And so if you don't care about it, you're okay with deluding yourself. You know what I mean? It's like you can live with that. If you're not truly curious about this and dying to find out what the answer is, and you may have to do just that to get it, you're satisfied with whatever Dungeons and Dragons answers comes down the pike at you. Because you've got to have the answer. You know, it's that desire for the easy way out or the easy resolution. So you can move on. And whether it's to move on away from this field or to move on into it, those are the two big nuts to be cracked is that. And I don't think you're going to have, for instance, I don't think you're going to have somebody like Stanton Friedman, who's been a career ufologist for as long as I can remember, suddenly step back and go, this part of my research I don't feel was valid. I just don't see that happening. And I also don't see a lot of people listening to us and saying, well, I agree with you, but, this guy's really on the money. Everybody's not okay with saying we don't really have a good handle on this. Even yet, we don't have a really good handle. And to boot, we've been deluding ourselves with one portion of it for quite a many years. That's a problem for a lot of people. I don't know why.
Well, because it's been pumped at us all these years as the only viable option.
Yeah, but on some level, I think it's nobody likes to get duped. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to admit they got taken. And I don't know what's so wrong about that. If something is, whether it's misleading deliberately or indeliberately, to be misled is to be misled. It
because
happens.
It's not just like you got misled. It's what you said originally. Look, people don't want to. It's not like you're just being misled or being duped about one thing. This one thing branches out into other areas.
Oh, absolutely.
And these other areas have come to define you. And so, for instance, I got an email with a link from a friend who knows all about our David Jacobs shenanigans and read my article and has listened to our show. Yet and still, she thought it would be prudent to send me a link to a regression past life session with the topic isn't this amazing? Look at this information.
Yeah.
And so I skim through a little bit of it, and it's this guy claiming to remember a future life where he lives on the moon and all this nonsense. And not only is the setup of it nonsense, but the hypnotist asks him, he's on the moon, with these people, blah, blah, blah. And the hypnotist says, well, what are you doing? Are you working? Is this your job? Does it get more leading than that? He didn't mention work. He didn't mention a job. He's just talking about being on the moon. Right. And so from there it goes into working on the moon. Now, why would she send me that? Because clearly, and this is some passive-aggressive attempt to hold on to hypnosis and to say, look, there's still some amazing stuff here, right? Look at this. This is amazing. Because you get rid of hypnosis, you're not just getting rid of alien abduction lore, you're getting rid of past life regression. You're getting rid of all of that new age stuff that popped up out of that you probably at this point have even forgotten developed out of hypnosis, because just the stories themselves have so been canonized and stood on their own that you probably forget that the original story came out of hypnosis. All of that goes away. Yeah, so that's a hard thing to give up because that's something that you've believed in that appeals to you and that you go, oh my God, yes, I so relate to that. I so want that to be the case.
And you've so built upon that.
Yeah, you invest your life in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had just before we get to make I had a friend on Facebook. And I get a lot of, I guess through the show, I get a lot of Facebook friend requests and stuff like that. And I usually do a bunch of them in a day. And I don't know how I got to be friends with this person, but the past couple posts I've noticed these weird pictures. And I looked at one of them yesterday. It was of the moon. There were 2 shots of the moon. One, the moon as we see it, pale, and shaded on one side. That look we're all familiar with. And then the other one, which was clearly color adjusted, over color adjusted. And this person says something to the effect of, clearly when you adjust the levels, there's vegetation on the moon. Why doesn't NASA know this? My response should have been,
it's all true.
Are you mad? Or, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Or, are you mad? Instead, my reply was, defriend, block.
Right.
It's just like, at some point, and believe me, this person seems like a perfectly friendly person, but I can't be around that anymore. I can't, because that just makes me hate this all the more. I already hate it. I told you this, a week ago. I hate this, which is why we've told people this on the show before. We're going to branch out a little bit broader on paranormal topics this year, and I'm really looking forward to something because, frankly, UFOs just piss me off anymore. I get up from doing this show, and it used to be that I'd really read a lot on the net about it and keep my finger on the pulse and read filers' files and all that sort of thing. I, do the rounds, and I don't do that anymore. Essentially, if we have a guest, I'll read the book that they wrote. I'll prepare a couple days in advance, and once I get done the show, I'm off until next week. I mainly read either DMT or trickster stuff or, not ufological matters at all. So I just saw that and I thought, Jesus, it's everywhere. It's even in my Facebook. I can't escape the nuttiness. There's vegetation on the moon. And clearly you can see between these 2 places of vegetation, you can see a scar on the planet that's beige. That's the bedrock. Oh.
Yeah. I have just but one question for you, sir, before we get into this interview.
Yeah.
And I may have asked this on another show. I don't remember. I feel like I probably should have. But since you did, you were an investigator and you also did group chat sessions with experiencers, of the people that that outright recall from, memory, their experiences, do any of them sound like the Jacobs, Hopkins, or even John Mack? Or even Barbara Lamb, or any of that stuff? Do any of them sound like hypnotically retrieved testimony?
One that I can remember, yeah. But I'm not so totally sure that he didn't have regression therapy done. I never really got to know this person all that well, but the things that he talked about were very clinical, sterile environments, medical, that sort of thing, operating theaters. But most of the people that I was close with, that I was friends with, no. I would say most of them were, and not even always ufologically themed, if you get my meaning. There's some stuff that just doesn't fit into that, such as orbs of light in the house, assorted weirdness like that.
Do you have any of their contact info? Could you get in touch with them and see if their experiences have changed the way yours have?
I could probably.
Well, there's your little project.
Well, you're talking about somebody that I knew probably more than a decade ago, so I'm not sure he's even alive. But I can definitely check. I mean, that was the one time that I heard him talk, and he mentioned things that seemed very similar to me to that. And I thought at the time, wow, that's interesting, because I never have that. I guess my genetic code's not any good. But then the more I talk to other people, and you got to realize that even in those groups at the onset, this is the first time that a lot of these people had talked about their experiences and with anyone at all. And so everybody was a little reserved. And I think that Lee and I were kind of the ones that went in full force and said, this is it. We're out with it right now, right here with these people. And I think that kind of broke the ice. And then after that, people started coming back with the. I'll put it to you this way: there were definitely experiences that I heard that people absolutely took as really happened to them in bodily form that I knew were just absolute nonsense. I mean, I'm sure it was their perception, but I don't think it had any basis in what was really going on. If there is such a thing as a screen memory, I don't know that I believe that or not. I'm not sure what that even exactly means. But it definitely had an altered state feel, but it had a very continuous extraterrestrial thematic throughout it. But it was real absurd. And I don't mean this to say weird in the sense of weird. I mean, this was like, I'll say that, one woman going on board a mothership to shop for shoes with her daughter.
Right. Yeah. You told us about that.
That just doesn't hold for me. That may have been what she perceived. I don't think she was lying. But do I think that's really what was going on? Not likely. Not for me, no.
But anyone who struck you like, yeah, that's the same thing I'm going through?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, couple. Yeah. I've met about a half a dozen people who actually their experiences started in childhood and ended in childhood almost exactly like mine. But that's all it's been, is about 6 over the years. And that's, like I said, it's 24 years this year. So most people, when you talk about spinning white squares and black sheets, they just look at you weird.
Right.
So there's that.
Very good. Well, let us get on with the show. Any final thoughts before we start the new year? Because we will not have time for an after chat.
A happy new year, everybody. Thank you to our subscribers, which we did last time, but it bears saying again. Thank you for letting us have the show and for subscribing to it. And thanks to all the great guests we've had this year, because there's been a lot of really great guests this year. And hope that continues. And I hope you all like the magazine when it comes out. I think you will. So anyway, you?
I think you just stole everything. What can I say? Except like ditto at that point.
Here comes the interview.
Leave me a breadcrumb, man. Leave me a breadcrumb.
I mean, that's it. I mean, really. These people are the reason we're able to do this. I mean,
I like the fans too.
I mean, I hate to sound too PBS about it, but this is listener supported, and we do appreciate the support, because without it, we absolutely could not do what we do. And this summer and spring, because let's face it, in the wintertime, there's nothing paranormal going on. You don't want to go out in the cold, but come spring, oh boy, we're taking some people out on the road. So that's going to be coming up, and I think one is going to be a trip to Point Lookout, and if not the Lighthouse, we're at least going to set up campground on the haunted area of that area, and probably a couple of sky watches that I would like to do. And there's been a couple of pretty prominent sightings around Maryland lately, and not far from my house.
Are you going to call them in with the flashlights?
Yes, we are in a vector craft in to within 100 meters.
That sounds good.
You can attend for only $800 after you sign my non-disclosure agreement.
It takes place at the Kennedy Airport, I believe, doesn't it?
It's close, Jeremy. Don't make light of this.
Close to the Ronald Reagan Airport? Is that what it is?
Clearly, you're an ignorant co-host.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Crap.
Here comes the interview.
Paratopia, it is the final event of the year, or at least in terms of our show. Well, it's the final show of the year. Jeff, I could have done that better. Take it from me.
Hello?
Jeff,
hi, Jeremy.
Hi. We're doing an informal sort of end of the year wrap chat about the various topics that we've covered, and who better to do that with than someone we haven't had on the show, but who knows a lot about a lot of things. That's right, Micah Hanks. Micah, welcome to the program.
Always my pleasure, guys. In fact, well, this time it's my pleasure because it's my first time, and any time I guess that you guys decide to have me back on in the future as well. And like I said, this isn't my normal microphone setup and everything, so hopefully it doesn't sound too weird on your end. I'm just glad to be here, and of course we'll dive into all kinds of strangeness tonight, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, let's start off with somebody anonymous. I don't know if he wants to be named, but a mutual friend of ours gave me a ring and started saying, the one thing in alien abduction lore that people aren't talking about is sex, because it's uncomfortable and so on and so forth. And he started to talk about sex in terms of how many abductees were molested or raped. And I thought he was going to make the case that, it's all sort of a cover story for tragic human events, but really what he was making the case for was that there is some sort of trickster element that is using sex, which is anti-structural, which is taboo and all of that, using it as sort of a lure to get people or get people's brains thinking differently to make room for tricksterish ways. I guess I'll ask you, is that a fair summary of that position, and do you think there's anything to it?
It's a very complex subject, but I'll put it to you like this. Of course, I know this fella, and like yourself, I don't know if he would prefer to be named or not, so we will err on the side of caution for the time being and not name this individual. I, on the other hand, don't have a problem telling you that this has been something ongoing for me. I've been contacted by a number of individuals who say that they have, had interaction with maybe not always aliens. In a few instances, it may have to do with ghosts or other non-human entities and things like that. In certain circumstances, it has been alien abduction that has been the topic in question. And I've found that there's a surprising consistency between reports of this sort of strangeness, Fortean reports and things like that, and elements that involve sexuality. You could for instance, actually there was a book, several books that have been written about this, but one that comes to mind was Paul Dean's Sex and the Supernatural, in which he kind of points to a lot of these alien abductions and metaphysical, spiritual, haunting circumstances and encounters, and kind of draws parallels between what people describe in their personal encounters and either the underlying or sometimes the very overt sexual aspects. In the 1950s and 60s with contactees, prior to what we know in the modern era as the more popular alien abduction, a lot of the contactees were saying that they were literally having sexual relations with people from different planets like Venus, and Mars and Jupiter. Now, granted, now we know, at least in terms of the exterior imagery we have of those worlds, those nearby planets, that there doesn't appear to be life inhabiting those planets. As far as I know, don't endorse any bizarre theories as far as there being underworld races and things like that, that might exist on those kinds of planets. That said, that's kind of the realm of science fiction, and that's what people have attributed to, I think, the contactee movement as well, is that a lot of individuals probably were kind of fulfilling and maybe even living their fantasies, through their claims of, what seemed pretty fantastic on their own, reports of contact with extraterrestrials that often looked human and that often were of the opposite sex, were very beautiful and wanted to breed with them. So, but as time went on, that changed a little bit. We, of course, were introduced to the 1961 encounter with Betty and Barney Hill, and of course the more familiar medical experiments that took place in those circumstances, which did focus not only on trying to pull Betty's teeth out after apparently Barney's dentures were removed during his examination, according to their recounting of the events through hypnosis, but also a series of examinations that did also focus on their sexual organs, and of course Betty Hill famously claimed that a long needle was inserted into her navel. This would become kind of a staple of later alien abduction reports, and that sort of thing has continued. Go ahead.
Let me just stop you there. As far as hypnosis goes, are you still on board with hypnotically retrieved memory?
That's an iffy one, to be honest with you, Jeremy, because I've got books. I've got one of Walter Gibson's really early books on hypnosis. I've been studying that a good bit lately. There's a real divided opinion on that. Some people believe that, I think it is clear that memories can become repressed, especially in the event that an individual goes through a traumatic circumstance, whether it be a car accident. Maybe later on I can actually get to a interview I actually did today with an individual who actually had a experience where they were in a vehicular accident. The girl was 15 years old. She was airlifted out of this circumstance and actually thought, as she was being removed from this circumstance, she was so traumatized, she literally seemed to have been kind of thrust into an altered state of consciousness and had begun to perceive that as she was being airlifted away, she was being levitated, carried away by individuals, and that she was actually, being molested by aliens. It's a very bizarre circumstance. When it comes to hypnosis, I think that in circumstances like that, sometimes repressed memories due to trauma can be recovered, but there are also many instances, especially with regard to allegations of ritual abuse in satanic cults and things like that, where it has been found that some of these so-called memories were actually completely fabricated, and some of the individuals who had these fabrications, and allegations of sexual assault and things like that, were later found to have, for instance, I think one of them was Beth Rutherford. Was it Rutherford? I think in the 1980s, she had essentially been kind of convinced by a counselor, if I remember the circumstances correctly, that she had been sexually molested, and violently so, by her father, who was a minister, that her mother had assisted in this, and that she'd actually had to perform abortions on herself before the age of 14. A clinical examination later found that she was not only still a virgin at age 22, but could not have ever possibly been pregnant, and so she ended up suing the counselors that kind of led to this false installation of memories. So it's a divided situation with hypnosis. Some people do claim that they have successfully been able to, if not recall repressed memories altogether, take on a better understanding of things that maybe weren't clear. And some people say that it's completely bunk, and that some, that you really can't trust hypnosis at all.
But when we say some people, right?
Some people.
That gives the impression that there are two equal sides of equal, let's say, education in the field of hypnosis and psychology. And I think that is a misleading impression because, for one, since the mid-'90s, it hasn't been used in any court of law in any Western country. It's pretty much been taken down. We had on Dr. Scott Lilienfeld, who basically just tore it apart for us on this show. And
including memories that are repressed.
Yeah, I mean, I just when it comes down to, you don't know what is memory, what is confabulation, what is bits of dream, what is bits of emotion that you've had from watching a TV show that's getting mixed in there, and it all comes out as quote unquote memory. To me, it's like, this is a done deal. Why are we even dealing with hypnosis anymore in this field?
Right, and that's the thing, let's look at it in terms of ufology, which is kind of where my mind has been lately. Jerome Clark, he was even the editor of Fate magazine, I think, in the 1970s, and maybe just the 1970s. He may not have actually carried on into the 1980s, but let's actually get it right here, 1976 to 1989, editor of Fate magazine. Few would argue that Jerome Clark was literally one of the absolute leading experts in the field when it comes to ufology and the study of UFOs. He became more and more skeptical as time went on, and I can't find the particular quote, but I'd read an article the other day where he was quoted with direct relevance to hypnosis, and he said that literally, and here I think what needs to be stressed is, we don't maybe know for certain whether in every instance memories that are recalled under hypnosis aren't, at least to some degree, accurate. However, in many instances we know that they are not, and therefore, can you use hypnosis as a reliable source for gaining information pertaining to a person's claims of being abducted by an alien or anything else for that matter? I don't think so. I personally would not trust the use of hypnosis in those kinds of circumstances. And unfortunately, when you look back through a lot of the available literature, Intruders by Bud Hopkins, Communion by Whitley Strieber, these books, they all deal primarily with that, and that was the one of the main methods used in terms of collecting the data that those books and the theories that stem from them consisted from. Yeah.
So let me ask you this then: what do you do with this? The fact that we've had the contactees who, as you said, are they're basically playing out their fantasies and or making a buck, right? They're delusional and or businessmen and women, and then you come to the abductees, and you've got all of this hypnotically retrieved testimony that we pretty much, as scientifically minded people, I guess, have to dump. So what are you left with? Why? How are we even talking about an alien abduction field at that point? What do we have left?
You want me to be honest, guys? In my opinion, not much. And, I'll be called a pariah. But what's cool is that, you guys, I can see that you've already kind of begun to consider that. Many people have. My friend, I think I can mention his name, Wes Owsley. He and I talk about this quite a bit. And his associate, Stacy, Stacy Lowry, yeah, I know. I always mispronounce his name, so I want to make sure I say it right because I was on his show the other night and I mispronounced it. But Stacey Lowry and I, I've been having a lot of in-depth conversations with folks in the community recently about this sort of thing. When we get to the point where we're trying to be scientific, truly scientific about this, when there's gray area, you can't, it's not the kind of thing that you can kind of just say, well, this, and this, but even though half of it may not be true, we're going to go with what sounds good. When it comes to science, if you cannot prove it, you have to kind of rule it out, at least, until you have a better methodology that can be applied to a circumstance so that you can verify, like Jacques Vallée used to say, what you're trying to prove in a court of law. When it comes to abductions, of the extraterrestrial or any other kind, because of course there are a lot of people nowadays who are even this isn't a new concept by any means, but I see it becoming more popular, or maybe seeing a resurgence. This notion that maybe UFOs and or aliens are not extraterrestrial. The late Mac Tawney's brilliant mind there. His book, The Cryptoterrestrials, dealt with that subject, and I think that could be directly credited with this kind of resurgence in the thought, well, maybe they aren't aliens. What if we were to consider them something else? Now, the way I feel about it, considering that you cannot scientifically provide what you might, gosh, I don't know. I think some people argue that there is some evidence, physical or otherwise, of alien abductions. I haven't seen anything that, to my liking, would withstand rigorous scientific probing. And, boy, that's poor choice of words when we're talking about alien abduction. But to be true, or to be honest about it, and I think that's the problem, that people aren't really being honest about it. If we can't take those aspects of the phenomenon, that don't add up scientifically, what are we left with? I think that we're left with a bunch of different kind of maybe seemingly related phenomenon, but that aren't per se actually interconnected with one another. And we have to kind of break them apart and start looking at what we do know and what we can verify. More specifically, when we look at UFOs, I wonder, with the lack of credible, hard, scientifically provable evidence of alien abductions, how can we continue really to interconnect alien abductions, proposed alien abductions, and what we call UFOs, unidentified flying objects? Are they one and the same? They seem to be. Many people who claim to have been abducted claim that they were taken aboard craft that resembled these strange unidentified flying objects seen in the skies over the last several decades. But scientifically, again, we can't prove a connection. So it's not to say that the two are not connected, but I think that what would be wise is to try and break down the separate elements and try and trace them individually. For instance, with UFOs, we know that military organizations and governing bodies, not just in the United States but around the world, have spent decades collecting information, and a lot of this has actually been released through Freedom of Information Act requests, and also sometimes these governing bodies eventually just decide to make these public domain. We know that in official capacities throughout the years, there has been interest in a valid, real phenomenon taking place. Unidentified objects seen in the skies flying. These things can outmaneuver virtually anything that conventional aircraft of today, and probably of tomorrow and the next several years, will be capable of. That is something that is verifiable. We can't do the same with alien abduction, but maybe by looking at each one individually, we can learn more about the two. And when we bring those separate elements back together, how will we interpret that phenomenon later on down the road. That's what we probably need to do. And so I hate to say throw the baby out with the bathwater, but if we want to look at anything, we have to look at what we can prove first, and we have to take it from there.
Well, what do you do with the trickster hypothesis? Are you a proponent of that? Do you think that even, for example, cryptozoological elements, ghosts, and all of the sort of paranormal stuff, do you think it's all related in some way?
I've always kind of tried to look at interconnections between phenomena. And to be honest, my book, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, kind of takes the approach of looking at, a variety of phenomena like that, from UFOs to cryptozoology to the supernatural in terms of spirits, ghosts, hauntings, things like that. It tries to look at those sorts of subjects in a way that pertains directly to altered states of consciousness and people's alleged contact with non-human intelligence through altered states of consciousness. Now, that said, of course, Chris O'Brien, a friend of mine, wrote a book, Stalking the Trickster, that kind of takes a similar approach, but, kind of weaving strange phenomenon together under this understanding that there is this trickster element. And although I find it interesting, over time, and even since publishing my book, I've begun to try and kind of, again, take various phenomena that seem to be connected. First of all, some people might advocate the notion that there could be especially if we endorse an extraterrestrial hypothesis, there could be some sort of connection between reports of hairy hominids like Sasquatch and UFOs. The cryptozoologist camp, particularly the nuts and bolts, if this thing isn't a physical specimen, let's not toy with ideas to the contrary until we've proven that it is not a physical specimen. I think those people would kind of reject trying to tie those elements together. Some of the hardcore ufologists would also say, well, that's a different area altogether. This has little or nothing to do with UFOs. Even though most of the researchers in the separate fields would reject combining the two, there are folks who have done it. I think maybe John Keel touched on it a few times, and several others have, and some people have very credibly done so. Stan Gordon also has talked about sightings of hairy hominids and Bigfoot type creatures that could had appeared in conjunction with reports with UFOs. But taking it a step further, for me, first of all, I do tend now more so to try and break those separate phenomena apart, because I see that when you start tying things together like that, there does tend to be sort of a propensity of sorts for seeing patterns and associations, or beginning to see what appear to be parallels when they may not actually exist. And furthermore, taking even something that is considered based on our in many instances, pretty subjective knowledge base pertaining to things like UFOs. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier. I'm even getting to a point where I'm trying to take what we perceive as interconnected elements within a given, genre, let's say UFOs, break those apart. Which is why I was saying earlier, take UFOs, look at those separately from abduction, because as long as we keep tying the two together, we're going to continue to be thinking and accepting these theories like, they're abducting us and they're, harvesting, eggs and semen and things like that, and they're trying to make a hybrid race. We don't know if that's what's going on. Many abductees claim that, but these claims often come forward, under the influence of hypnosis, which is something that scientifically we have found, unfortunately, cannot be taken for its credibility in all, if any, circumstances. So take those elements, break them apart, look at each individual one. We look at the objects in the sky, we look at people's reports of, alleged abduction by these things. Maybe we would, begin to, alter our theories and think maybe these aren't aliens. Maybe they're something else. Maybe this entire experience is wholly non-physical. And surprisingly, a lot of abductee reports have even talked about this non-physical, almost metaphysical, spiritual aspect pertaining to alien abduction. So, I think that it can almost be dangerous in a sense to try and look for patterns and associations between subjects when there may not be those parallels. But the trickster approach is a little different, I guess, because it kind of tries to I don't know, I guess it could be unfairly called a catch-all, but the trickster hypothesis, as I understand it, seeks to try and explain these strange, truly bizarre, so bizarre that they don't fit into, what we would call science and what we would even call, folklore, and certainly not humanity. And it tries to explain these things as something that is purposefully here, almost as though to mislead humanity. You might look at that as a different thing.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at the more I dig into George Hansen's version, it seems like what you're saying is true. That's a version of the trickster, but it seems that there's also the George Hansen version, which is that the trickster is describing the interaction between us and the inkblot in this inkblot test, whatever that is. And so, for instance, George would say, you don't ask why. Why is not a good question to ask. Why does this stuff happen? It's just, this is how it happens, and it's anti-structural, so on and so forth. But not even just sociologically, not even just this is what humans do, but it's like, this is what humans do when confronted by and confronting this unknown, seemingly other intelligence. And that intelligence seems to, it doesn't seem to matter whether the intelligence is ghosts or Bigfoot or alleged aliens or what have you. So I find that interesting.
Well, following that logic, though, when we refer to intelligence, and unfortunately, George Hansen, I'm not as familiar with his approach to this. You might even want to touch on that briefly, but when you say intelligence, is that prescribing the idea that all these phenomena, let's say that you do choose to look at them as interrelated, that it is a singular intelligence, or that each is still an individual something, and all of these have this trickster interaction with humanity? Is it?
Well, I don't even think it's that defined. I think it's still, I don't know.
It's an abstract. I mean, the way he described it to us was it's simply an abstract undercurrent of the way reality works. And so when you're talking about, I mean, the best instance to me is the young couple buys their first home and proceeds to renovate, knock out walls, tear down wallpaper, paint, flooring, whatever. They start seeing ghosts in the house. And, of course, any paranormal investigator out there who investigates the case is going to flatly tell them, well, you're disturbing the environment. You're stirring up things. And I think most people tend to look at that and go, well, the spirits don't like you altering their environment. But in fact, what George says it is that the house is in a state of change, of chaos, of upheaval, that sort of thing. So it's in an anti-structural framework at that point. And so therefore, paranormal things seem to manifest, whether they be ghosts, whether they be a UFO sighting, whether it be an alien abduction, whatever. All that stuff seems to come to the fore a little bit. It starts out, one of the things I've talked about a lot on here is the notion of how much attention gets paid to the phenomena in anyone's life seems to garner that person some sort of experience down the line somewhere. And it's all based on a give and take type of thing. The more you give, the more you get. And George completely agreed with that. He's like, yeah, absolutely. That's, when you enter into studying this phenomena, you become anti-structural. You go out of your routine. And so that's more along the lines of, I think, where he's talking about. It's more or less an undercurrent of the way reality seems to work, at least with this phenomenon.
Well, that's interesting. And when it comes to being anti-structural, I want to touch on something pertaining to that, maybe not in the same sense that George had implied, but first I also have to say that when you're talking about tearing things up and breaking things apart or renovating a home and ghosts appearing and things like that, if you were to follow that logic, it's interesting to note that construction sites and things like that often have been associated with sightings of Bigfoot and Sasquatch creatures like that. Maybe that's because maybe it's because you're tearing down trees and you're actually creating an open space where they're going to be more prone to be spotted anyway. I don't know that you can exactly apply logic to that circumstance, but it reminded me of those kind of reports. Now that said, coming back to the anti-structural idea, I may not be applying this in the same way that George had, but based on what you're saying there, it did remind me of the notion again of breaking down a seemingly a series of seemingly interrelated phenomena. And again, we'll use UFOs, alien abduction, things like that. Maybe underground bases. You could tie a bunch of things together in there that kind of have culminated over the years to create the sum total of what we call ufology. When you break those things apart, and you start looking at the individual elements, again, I think that this scientifically allows you the ability to analyze a piece before you have to try and have all these pieces together and analyze the whole. What do we do when we're trying to just, to study a new species? We dissect it. We take it apart. We want to understand how individual pieces work. Unfortunately, over the years, when it comes to structure and anti-structure, even if there is no actual structure there, with ufology and with a number of different genres, relating to the paranormal, the supernatural, Fortean, whatever you wish to call it, I think that people innately have a desire to have, a beginning, middle, and end. They want to have a climax and a resolution, and therefore storylines end up being woven into the study of things like UFOs and cryptozoological monsters and things like that. And people, lo and behold, end up kind of basing their entire notion of the nature and the reality of this phenomenon on this sort of loose construct of a story that begins to emerge. That story, in any instance like that, is going to emerge when you try and tie together those elements. So again, I think that anti-structure applied to that circumstance, we could benefit from it, because if we are not trying to always find, a structure, a story, some semblance of meaning behind all this, knowing that the nature of the universe does tend to be fairly chaotic and sometimes things just happen without rhyme or reason, I think we could actually benefit. We would probably find that we were misled less often, and that we would be less likely to be led away from an actual reality by the mere hope of trying to assign reason and trying to assign some sort of pattern of events to everything that we study. Sometimes you just have to break things apart and take individual weirdness for what it is, which is probably just that, random happenings and strange occurrences.
Well, don't you think that, and I brought this up to George on a couple of accounts when we were talking to him about the whole anti-structure, about human behavior. I mean, how much of this falls into the construct of human behavior plus the trickster element that may be at work in all of this? I mean, when you've got essentially, like Jeremy and I were talking about last night, that ufology's become, for a lot of people, a capitalist, an investment. I mean, their time is spent researching, writing books, selling books, doing lectures, going all over the country and sometimes all over the world. And so when you find something amiss in your own work, you cover it up because you don't want to talk about that, because that then puts you off the lecture circuit. Isn't that where a lot of that seems to come from, where we hear of these embellishments of accounts and accounts that continue to unfold and unfold and unfold? It just to a really crazy rate. But at the same time, one of the most valuable things I think anyone in this field has ever told me came out of George Hansen's mouth, and that was that the paranormal has a battle cry, and it is, make them look like a nut. And so there you are. I mean, to speak of any of this with 100% honesty, is to be looked down upon, because that's just crazy talk.
Yeah, Jeff, you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, no one wants to have to admit that they're wrong. When in reality, when you're studying, the unexplained, we call it unexplained for a reason.
Nobody's right to begin with, right?
Exactly, and that's the thing, is that I've been I'm working on a new book. I don't know where this book's going to go. I have a sense it's going to make some people angry, because I'm trying to look at, and this is why I keep using ufology as an example when we're talking about this kind of anti-structural thing here, because the book is going to deal with UFOs from this sort of point of break it apart. Don't worry if what we talk about, the separate elements, tend to contradict one another, because the idea here is not to ignore one piece of evidence that might show up that is inconvenient when compared along with another, if we look at each individual element and can still feel with at least some degree of certainty that those individual elements have been thought apart and then thought back together with as much reason and rationale that can be applied to them. If there appear to be contradictions, well, good, because there are going to be contradictions. And it really comes down to one thing, and Jeff, this really is kind of capitalizing on what you just said. Everyone can't be right. Look, there are theories that occupants of UFO craft, if first of all, these craft are actually occupied by what we know as physical beings. For all we know, they could be autonomous drones from another planet that are actually, completely mechanical. We don't know. But to speculate further, okay, and take this logic and try and apply all this stuff to it when we really don't know anything about what's going on. We have so many different theories that have resulted. We've got interdimensional hypotheses about, creatures that are literally able to, kind of shift through rents in space-time. We've got, Mactoni's crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, which, although he kind of made it clear in the book that it was more of a thought game of sorts, maybe that he didn't fully endorse the theory himself, but for the sake of argument and for the sake of looking at this logically and then covering all angles and affording it honest, true conversation, that he had to put it out on the table and lay it all out there. I think that we have that crypto-terrestrial, this essentially just a terrestrial aspect. We have this interdimensional aspect. There's the very popular extraterrestrial hypothesis. They can't all be the same thing. Aliens couldn't be from somewhere out in outer space and from Earth and interdimensional. Maybe they could, but that would probably so far exceed what we understand about the nature of physics and reality that there'd be no point in talking about it. But the point is that if everyone can't be right, then eventually we're going to have to accept the inevitable, which is that someone is wrong. Nobody wants to be that person who's wrong, and therefore, when these inconsistencies and these contradictions start coming together, people more often tend to ignore them or try and cover them up because it doesn't conform to the path that their logic has already begun to take them on. So, again, the notion of could you word it like this? Anti-structuralization? That might just be too much, but
we make up words a lot on this show. Go ahead.
Great, we'll make up another one. Anti-structuralization of the Fortean, and specifically ufology. I know in my next book, that's what I'm going to be dealing with. And that's what needs to happen, frankly, if we want to move forward. Because there are going to be contradictions. People are going to be wrong. Don't be so blinded by pride and the facade of power and the hope that you're going to be the one who figured it all out. Because we really don't know what's going on. We have no clue.
Yeah, well, of course, I think that that's a valuable point. But the problem is that we're seeing. What's worried me, at least the past 10 years, more than anything about this field, is that I would say 22 or 23 years ago, you didn't have nearly the amount of fringe element being injected into this like we do today. Mm-hmm. You certainly had your points to stay away from. You certainly had your topics not to broach. In the company of Bruce Maccabee or Richard Hall or anything, these are people who know the ropes, and there are certain things you just don't bring up because it's ridiculous. But nowadays, it seems to be, at least it seems to me that these things are in the driver's seat of this quote unquote field, however loosely defined that is. And when you talk about being wrong and admitting wrong information or inaccurate studies, you're running into a whole new thing here, which is that ufology's become this belief system that it's effectually acting like a religion. Because yes, we've got photographs and we've got eyewitness accounts and we've got all of that, but by and large, it exists as an article of faith for most people. And that to me is where it gets the most dangerous, is because anytime that you try to argue. And I know because I did this for a year and a half with a group, you try to argue sense to these people and you present them with data that is absolutely concrete, irrefutable, and demonstrable, and they will sit there and ignore it for the sake of a belief system. So the question is, how do you get over that? It's not so much how do we admit we're wrong. How do we get over that everyone's built a belief system around garbage?
It's almost like that tendency toward building a whole, sometimes a religion around a rather fringe subject. It's almost like that's something that's just kind of built into the chemistry of the human, the human character, and that's evidenced, I think, speaking of Jacques Vallée and some of these more scientific researchers. in the kind of the UFO cults and things like that have come together over the years. You take something that's already fringe, and then you build a religion around it. Where people believe that a flying saucer is going to bring all the world leaders to Zeta 2 Reticuli in the end days and things like that. And it does become pretty terrifying. Jacques Vallée, during his years researching everything from mathematical computation of the energy of craft to whether or not they were truly extraterrestrial, he often warned about that and about allowing blind faith and belief to lead to dangerous aspects of the fringe elements associated with this realm of research. I think he was always very wary of the so-called UFO cults and things like that, which I don't know exactly where they had their genesis, but they, I think, probably began to emerge around the time of the contactee movement. It was kind of an alternative. And speaking with a friend of mine, a fellow researcher named Christopher McCullum today, we were talking about how in the world today, not to say that religion doesn't exist, but for many, we are kind of emerging now, humanity, as a post-theistic society in which people, especially younger generations, seem to have less and less desire or feeling of necessity for religion and for God and spirituality. Now, of course, statistically, that is still shown to change as people get older. And that as they get older, people tend to kind of gravitate back towards religion. I've seen a lot of researchers who, when I met them, 10 years ago, they called themselves atheists. They slowly became agnostic, and now they are strong proponents of whether you want to call it a Christian God or a Buddha or something like that. They're proponents of there being a divine creator of some sort, some non-human intelligence. It's funny how, yes, as you get older, spirituality seems to become more important, but nonetheless, in general terms, many would argue that we're emerging more as a post-theistic society where technology has kind of replaced a lot of the almost tribal belief systems and the true religious, because this is the only way we can hope to relate to the mysteries of the cosmos. That was what our ancestors held close to them. That was the very essence of their being. Science has kind of replaced that for modern man. And if we were to consider ourselves as an emerging post-theistic culture, but nonetheless a culture with a propensity for kind of attaching ourselves to weird, fringy, unprovable things, the likes of whether you want to call it an angel or a demon or an alien, is it that these fringe elements that are present today in the research of ufologists and cryptozoologists, are these those new angels and demons that our ancestors once spoke of? Is this how that strange fringe element that seems always and ever present within human culture and as you'd said, Jeff, human nature, is that the modern interpretation of those things that were once angels, devils, and gods and the like?
Well, I thought that until I read Jacques Vallée's latest book. That kind of destroyed that thought for me. Yeah. That the manifestations of old were the fairies and all of that, and that people didn't see cigar shapes and discs and all these kind of craft that people see today, if we can even call them craft, if that's even what they are. Sure. Geometric symbology in the sky, has been seen like that for a very long time. Far past our capability of flight, of course, but what you were talking about as far as being a religion kind of falling by the wayside. I mean, what I see in that, which I think definitely applies to the whole conversation about, belief systems and how belief systems get changed and altered over time. I mean, I think definitely we've seen the UFO, the religion of UFOs change over the years. It went from the Adamski type stuff into the Meyer stuff, and now we're into exopolitical stuff, which I don't care what you want to call it. That to me is the closest thing that we have to a mass delusion of today. Even somebody like Joel Osteen, who's like a really popular televangelist, he is packing them in all across this country. He is selling out places like in minutes flat, and he preaches a very interesting breed of Christianity, which is more along the lines of the power of positive thought, even akin to something like The Secret, which came out some years ago. Mm-hmm. If you listen to a lot of his stuff, and my mom is a big fan of his, yeah. And I every once in a while she'll flip me an email, and I mean it's like reading The Secret newsletter. Do you think that that change in thought is reflective of I don't know, of a deepening in consciousness that's going on? Are we kind of wrestling with the fact, like, yeah, we still have to believe in Christianity, but we can still kind of put it into a different box that's more attractive in trying to harness new people into the religion? I mean, to me, it seems like religion is exploding in certain ways.
Yeah, and maybe it is. You know, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, when I refer to this post-theistic society, I'm not necessarily even putting my own opinion and perception out there. I've heard other people make reference to this. I like yourself, have noticed that in many capacities that religion, Christianity and otherwise, is very much alive and in some ways stronger today. Unfortunately, when we talk about the political implications of all this, I think that the discontent among various groups and cultures around the world, whether you want to look at it in terms of Americans versus anti-American sentiment or vice versa, anti any country sentiment. There's a lot of geopolitical strife going on right now. And, we've got, a new nuclear treaty that we're looking at and everything, or that we've actually, I suppose, was actually voted on the other day, the New START treaty with Russia. We're trying to curb things that have been problems all along, and yet there are always new little problems emerging because essentially, in the grand scheme of things, people can't get along. And I think the manifestation of religion and spirituality is one of the ways that people tend to deal with that. And, for people who see it that way, I think that they feel the need for spirituality and religion as much now as ever before. While there's also still, and we don't want to contradict, what I put out earlier, that, there's also a faction of people who feel that more and more humanity is becoming post-theistic, less in need of a God, so to speak, and that we find, the things that we need that give us spiritual fulfillment in electronic, ways, via the internet and things like that. To a degree, I think that is true, but no, I don't think that people are going to, lose spirituality and forget about it altogether. And if anything, you just wait, because a little further on down the road, there will be technological religions based around technology. I'm sure that in various capacities those already exist. Really, I mean, we could go down that road, but it's probably another heady subject that we're trying to really dive into. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you something. I mean, I have not looked into cryptozoology very much over the years. I mean, here and there, ever so briefly. And you obviously have studied it far more than I. Mm-hmm. Do you see this same kind of? And we ask this of people who've come on the show that are in the ghost field. Do you see this same kind of absolute heady devotion and almost with religious overtones in something like that, as opposed to what you find in ufology? I mean, do you see that sort of thing that happens in that as well?
Yeah, to a degree. I think it's different in the sense that, I started out as a person who was most interested in cryptozoology. My first article I think that I ever published was as recently as 2004, really. In the grand scheme of things, I'm buddies with guys like Jim Mars and Brad Steiger. I realize I'm still a newbie, when you're compared to guys like that. Brad, my gosh, has written about everything, and he's been doing it since, the 1960s, contributing to magazines just like Fate magazine, like I did. But my first article that I published, years ago in Fate was about the idea that maybe there is a language that, Sasquatches, specifically around the Harrison Lake area of British Columbia, might literally be able to speak, and that dialect might actually resemble certain indigenous languages in that area, specifically some of the Chehalis natives that live around the Harrison Lake area. Now, that said, it's kind of a funny subject when you bring up cryptozoology, and is there that same sort of that kind of base in there that look at the that look and kind of attach themselves to certain elements, almost religiously. Yes, but it's different because with cryptozoology, although and this is what's really crazy, I've spoken to very credible researchers, and I have friends who I trust and who I believe who have told me some wild stories. And every now and then I do get these reports of Bigfoot creatures just vanishing into thin air. In fact, actually, years ago, I was talking on the telephone with Brad Steiger about this, and he had even mentioned when he was younger, and engaging in field research and following footprints and things, and he and a group of people, would literally be in a circumstance where they'd be following a set of footprints into a secluded kind of closed-off canyon, knowing that there was no way for a creature physically to be able to get out of this circumstance, and nonetheless, they'd always come up empty-handed, as though these creatures literally could just vanish. There are those kinds of reports. I don't know how you deal with those. But in spite of that, because a creature like, for instance, a Bigfoot resembles, maybe a gorilla, a large human-like creature, but nonetheless something flesh and blood, I think that the real serious cryptozoological base out there, Lauren Coleman and the really, truly well-respected researchers who have dedicated so much time and study to this phenomenon, they're going to tend to look at it much like a biologist would. Whereas with UFOs, there's so little, we can't touch it, we can't taste, we can't feel, we can't smell. I mean, various, reports do describe physical contact with, not just UFOs, but, occupants alleged to actually pilot and travel in those craft. But it's not the kind of thing that I think can be equated, in terms of a biological specimen that might actually exist, and with proper planning and maybe tranquilizer guns or a really well set trap, we might be able to capture one, and then we've got an actual specimen. With UFOs, I think that based on what we know about them, it's something so far removed. I think Jerome Clark actually even said something to the notion of in his darker moments. Actually, I've got the quote right here because I was looking at some of Clark's stuff earlier. In my darker moments, I've come to suspect that UFOs may represent something so far beyond us that our attempts to understand them may be comparable to an ant's efforts to comprehend the principles of nuclear physics. It's something that's so far removed from us that I think that when it's really far out there, no hope of understanding it, at least in the present, it's almost something that is more easily kind of attainable in terms of religious status. And so, yeah, sure, there are going to be people who will attach this kind of fervor to a cryptozoological subject, but generally people, I think, treat that, either they dismiss it outright or they almost do treat it with more credibility because of the biological aspect of there being a physical creature, whereas these aliens and these UFOs, I mean, it's something that's just, I think, even today, still too far beyond us.
Yeah. I wanted to shift gears before we get too late in the show. I wanted to ask you about drugs.
Drunks? Oh, drugs. Oh,
drugs. Yes. We had Dennis McKenna actually on the show. All the way back at episode 7, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think between him, his brother Terrence, Dr. Rick Strassman, all of these people. I have read their books. I haven't read an abundance of UFO books over the past decade, but I have read those books. And in my mind, these are some of the most important ufological books ever written.
Oh, yeah.
I find it amazing that so many accounts are so similar in description. And these are not vague or uncolorful. They're certainly colorful and speak of beings that, for all intent and purposes, sound exactly like the kind of beings that I've personally seen and that my wife has seen along with me. The attitude, the demeanor, the sardonic humor, often at times. What is your take on that? I mean, people would say these are hallucinations. These are products of the mind. And therefore, we have to say that it's a good possibility that, that the alien abduction thing or any contact with anything related to aliens, quote unquote, or UFOs, quote unquote, could be strictly of the mind. But there seems to be evidence that that we're actually altering a state like a radio signal and being able to perceive things that are perhaps all around us all the time, which is uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Oh, sure it is. I think it's interesting though, because what you have to understand, and I think a lot of people would take what I'm about to say kind of out of context. I don't mean what I'm about to articulate here as some sort of an affront to people who claim that they have had some valid, real experience with aliens or with non-human intelligences, as I know that at least as I understand that the two of you have. I personally am really boring, and I've never, seen a ghost. I've never encountered an alien, and frankly, I don't, I'm not a user of psychoactive substances and things, the likes of which I talk about in my book. A lot of people don't understand why I'd be talking about, psilocybin, mushrooms, and dimethyltryptamine, and some of these powerful hallucinogens if I weren't a user. But the thing is that there are plenty of people like Dennis and Terence McKenna, ethnobotanists. And people who scientifically and in terms of the ethnology and the and a lot of the spiritual circumstances present therein have taken the time to actually become users and to understand the nature subjectively of this experience of the hallucination. And they've come back and they've been able to tell us about that circumstance, and whether that is for good or for ill, that it has inspired others to do likewise. I'll leave that up to others. I personally have not done that myself, and I think that when I was fishing my proposal for my book around to different publishers, a lot of people were like, maybe you should think about experimenting a little bit more and then write some more, add to this, and get back with us. In other words, why don't you go try some drugs and see what happens to you and then write about it in your book? With the body of information out there, that has been offered to us by the likes of Rick Strassman and Terence McKenna, and these types, I didn't think that being another subjective voice in that crowd would be helpful. I thought that, as opposed to doing that, to try and look at this subject journalistically and try and make patterns and associations, again, within that specific field, which is why I kind of split my book into 3 sections: magic, mysticism, and then entheogenic molecules, and how these things all pertain to one specific phenomenon: altered states of consciousness in contact with non-human intelligences. I wanted to try and look at it and draw those elements together objectively from an outside perspective. That said, doing so and studying that kind of tangent with UFOs and things like that, I'm strongly beginning to lean, in my personal views, toward the notion that a lot of mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, contact with what appear to be extraterrestrials. I prefer the term alien because if they're not actually from space someplace, they're still nonetheless apparently non-human, thus alien presences. I believe that all these things in some way are the same event, the same manifestation, the same circumstance. Going all the way back to Scott Rogo and Ruffles' book, The Tujunga Canyon Contacts, they were talking about, or maybe Tuyunga, actually. That's one of those interesting words to appear in the title of a book. Fascinating book, though. The Anomalous books republished a few years ago. In that book, the authors looked at the nuts and bolts claims of abductees in correspondence with the more parapsychological aspects of many of these cases, and they talked about abductees who actually claimed that they weren't physically taken, but that their minds were abducted, and that they could actually see themselves hovering outside their bodies. This is something that's very common in the reports of near-death experiences and out-of-body travel, astral projection, and these sorts of things. So clearly, I don't think that in every instance, alien abduction as we know it is a wholly physical phenomenon. I would say that probably, if we could literally get people's reports of encounters of this sort outside the bounds of what occurs during hypnosis and whatnot, I would probably say that few people would say that at least some aspect of their experience did not at least have a metaphysical quality to it. And I think that that's because a lot of this is probably more interrelated than we realize. So, again, that's not to take away from people's sense that something has happened to them, because that's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'm trying to say that I think that what we need is a redefinition of the nature of this phenomenon, not to try and cast it aside and say it didn't happen. Clearly something is happening. Clearly people are having real experiences. That doesn't mean that every experience that, every report that comes forward is true. We can't account for the veracity of all of them, but I'm convinced that many people and their claims are legitimate. But we probably have to consider different ways of understanding the nature of the phenomenon, the underlying phenomenon, because there's clearly more going on here than meets the eye. And it may not be nuts and bolts aircraft bringing, nuts and bolts extraterrestrials down who literally levitate you out of your window and take you on board a spaceship. It may be that there is something that is more similar to the reports of the psychonauts and the people who have used substances like dimethyltryptamine and the people who have achieved these ecstatic states of mind through meditation and things like that, and even who have used magical rituals throughout history, and hence magic, mysticism, and the molecule looks at a lot of those things. And again, I've said before, in fact, I've said during this discussion we're having tonight, and I always like these. I'm glad you guys had me on, by the way, tonight, because, sometimes there are interviews and sometimes you get to sit down and have a real discussion, and that's what we've done tonight. It's been a lot of fun. I always enjoy just really being able to just have a good talk with really intelligent people, and it's harder and harder to find them these days, but you guys have been great. And that said, I think that there's a lot of this stuff that it does seem to be interrelated. And although I'm talking about breaking things apart, it sounds a lot like looking at, magic, mysticism, and the molecule, tying all that stuff together and relating it to altered states of consciousness. Sounds contradictory to what I was talking about earlier. Again, there are going to be contradictions. And I've said that even since writing that book, I'm getting more and more of the mind that you have to take various phenomena, break them down, look at them individually. But at least in some capacity, I hope I've explained, with some degree of efficiency, that that's what I was trying to do with my book. In the future, I'm going to try and do that even more so.
I don't think it's contradictory to want to parse out the parts from the whole. Even if you think that the whole is interrelated, you still want to know what those specific interrelated parts do on their own.
Exactly. Yeah.
But let me ask you, let's just take the alien, because I think that's the most sort of obvious case here. You can see a gray alien if you're an abductee. You can see a gray alien if you take enough mushrooms. You can see a gray alien, right? If you take enough ayahuasca or DMT, you can see a gray alien if you know how to meditate correctly. So are we saying then that drugs, could we even just take out the drugs? I mean, are all of these things accessing the same, let's say, locations or the same beings or what have you? And so drugs are just sort of like the cheap, easy way out. But really, if you know how to just sort of clear your mind in the right way, that you can sort of tune into whatever is not of your mind clutter, which I think these other places.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would tell you that that's exactly what's going on. During Strassman's studies at the University of New Mexico, or was it? I believe it was New Mexico in the 1990s, where that study was held with of course, where he got DEA approval for administering dimethyltryptamine to these people who chose to participate in the study. Now, the thing about that study, there are actually a lot of things about that study that are worthy of discussion here, and I've had brief correspondences with Strassman about it in the past, some of which I included in my book, but the thing that needs to be pointed out is that, as I understand it, most, if not every single one of the participants had actually been previous users of psychedelic substances. And it's not just that these people were going out there for a free handout so that they could go get drugs. I mean, I think that Strassman probably wanted people with a little experience so that they would not be completely and utterly shocked by what is often described as kind of a full throttle, kind of like it's literally just this frontal assault. You're thrust into this really vivid, strange environment. When people are under the influence of dimethyltryptamine, DMT. I think that Strassman knew that if he had more experienced participants, that people would be able to, weather the storm, so to speak. But it's interesting because there was one individual during that study whom the DMT did not affect, and this individual had claimed that he had reached solely through meditation ecstatic states where he literally altered his consciousness and entered environments and states of consciousness very similar to what the participants who had vivid recollections of their encounters while under the influence of DMT had. So that was only one instance, but there was a theory that Strassman proposed was, and that involved the notion that if a person could, through meditation, trigger an altered state of consciousness by what he called an endogenous release of DMT into the body. In other words, you meditate and you literally cause your body to release DMT internally, because what people need to understand is dimethyltryptamine is produced in the human body. Sometimes, although there's very little, very scant, evidence to verify this 100%, but some studies have suggested that at the time of death, that DMT levels are higher in the bloodstream, and this, some have equated with DMT being released at the time of death, and hence when people have these quote-unquote near-death experiences, what may actually be occurring is the pineal gland or something else, wherever the DMT in the human body emanates from, releases this, what Strassman called a endogenous release of this substance, and then people end up actually having sort of a psychedelic experience as they're dying. Thomas Edison laying on his deathbed, the strict, realist, and Mr. Logic during his lifetime, he's lying on his deathbed and starts kind of addressing what appeared to be some things, individuals or something he could see as though looking off into the distance, and said something to the effect of, "God, they're beautiful. Can you see them?" And then passed away. Many people report these kinds of experiences. So I think that one thing that many, proponents of the entheogenic theories pertaining to this is that these substances like DMT that are made in the body, produced in the human body, could be chemical reasons behind ecstatic mystical states, and that yes, indeed, you could maybe take drugs completely out of the picture, and if you knew how to access altered states of consciousness manually, we'll say, you could literally do that without you could potentially literally do that without having to consume some substance.
Well, have we figured out whether or not something is more repeatable? For instance, if you have a transcendental meditation regiment, will that produce repeatable results in where you go and what you see, as opposed to Strassman's DMT work?
That's the thing. Strassman did a DMT study because he was able to get DEA approval. Unfortunately, since the majority of this research deals with substances that are illegal to buy and to sell in the United States and elsewhere for that matter. Heck, you think our drug laws are bad? It's even more draconian in other places. I think that unfortunately, the repeatability, in other words, the scientific merit of these circumstances and the ability to study them scientifically has fallen to the wayside because there's still a very taboo association that most make with the consumption of these substances. Now, I'm not advocating that people go out and take dimethyltryptamine or they start eating, magic mushrooms and things like that. What I'm saying, though, is that if there's any, scientific merit to further studying these, I know that they've been able to get, pharmaceutical kind of, pill forms of psilocybin and things like that and administer studies. I think Johns Hopkins University 2 years ago may have engaged in a study where psilocybin, in pill form was administered to people who had mystical experiences and described months after the fact still feeling happier and still having lasting what they called positive effects after that experience. But generally speaking, those kinds of things are still considered very taboo, and therefore those instances are not going to be afforded the scientific understanding that we could by now perhaps have of them, or at least we aren't any closer to achieving that understanding because society labels these things as bad, and we have them outlawed, and you can't buy them, you can't sell them, and of course anyone in the scientific mainstream who tries to involve themselves in studies associated with these is going to be called a crackpot, or they're going to be accused of corrupting people and investing in corruption and things like that. It's kind of a twisted situation. So Jeremy, I don't know about in terms of the repeatability, if that's something that we have even gotten close to understanding because of the taboos still associated with these substances.
Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll hand it off to Jeff. We had on a Lakota man named Teokusin Ghost Horse a few times, and some of the more controversial things, or I put that in quotes, he said, were that language is not... well, it's not an evolution, let's say. It's not anything. It's kind of worthless. Written language is not impressive, basically. Language is not impressive. He also spoke circularly, which bothered a lot of people on our message board. And I had asked him, what do the Lakota do in their free time? And, what do they sit around doing? And he said, basically, they tell jokes. And now I'm reading a book on the Bushmen of the Kalahari by Bradford Keeney. And he he lived among them as one of their medicine people for many, many years. They accepted him in and showed him their ways of what he calls, original spirituality, because they were sort of the root race of humanity. And before there was religion, there was, the Kalahari people doing their Kalahari thing. And they speak circularly, right? They don't speak in linear terms. They talk about language and thought getting in the way of actual spirituality, and they, try to be as absurd as possible, because basically laughter and love are the key elements to having the ecstatic God experience. So I wonder, I put these things together, and I put them together with George Hansen's trickster theory, which, leans heavily on being anti-structural. Well, anti-structural to what? What's the structure? The structure is Western society. So to be anti-structural is to be absurdist, laughter, all of these sort of indigenous things, is to cut the crap of linear logic, is to cut the crap of language, and to be irrational in a sense. So my question is, if all of this is true, and then you see this, shades of this in meditation and in Buddhism and in Hinduism, which is getting rid of thought, right? You're quieting the mind, getting rid of thought, so that the greater case of us can exist, can come into being. So what's the point of doing research and writing books and being scholars and any of this stuff? And why do we keep asking ourselves these same questions when it seems like the answer is just shut up and learn to laugh?
Well, yeah, and I think we could all learn a little something from that. Shut up, learn to laugh, and I like to always say, learn to find the beauty, the perfect nature in imperfection. You're never going to find a perfect mate. You're never going to find, a perfect. I've been, fortunate enough, blessed enough to be spending some time with one of my ex-girlfriends. For a lot of people, that wouldn't be a blessing per se, but, she's been in town for the holidays, and we've been, catching up and talking a little bit and everything, and going out having dinner or whatever. And, for me, it's been wonderful, and that's been kind of a theme that has kind of emerged in a lot of our discussions over the last few days is, learn to find the beauty in imperfection, because you're never going to find perfect. You're never going to find exactly what you're looking for. And when it comes to these strange subjects and Fortean things, UFOs, Bigfoot, God knows what all else out there, I think we probably are going to have to fundamentally accept that, maybe it's just, Jeff and Jeremy in our lifetimes, or maybe ultimately we will never know the true nature, the front and the back side of the hand, so to speak, pertaining to all this phenomenon that we're trying to study. Should we just forget about it and get out of the way, accept that Eastern sort of no-mindedness, don't overthink it?
Well, not even that. How about just maybe it's our own prejudice of not wanting to believe that these people who come along, like Tiokasin, who says, yeah, we know all about this stuff. We call them space brothers or whatever. We don't want to believe that. We don't want to accept that. And what if it's just plain true? What if it just is that we are our worst enemy? We're getting in the way. Or as the Bushmen said, because missionaries had gone to Africa and tried to make them Christians, and they thought that was absurd. The Bushmen did, because they said God isn't on a piece of paper. Your God seems to exist in paper. What is that? Yeah. You live it, So it's the difference between thinking about it, discussing it, and living it. Or, to put it crudely, white people can't dance. I mean, is that it? Are we just out of rhythm? And so why don't we just, learn how to get rhythm again?
Hey, get rhythm. Yeah, that's a great song, by the way, Johnny Cash. Maybe you're right, though. Maybe
you just proved my point.
No. I'm just being ADD, but no, you're absolutely right. I think that maybe we get in the way of ourselves through intellectual thought, and we prevent our alignment with that so-called cosmic rhythm. That seems to be not just a consistency among mystic traditions and things like that. I think that that's also just kind of true with life. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's a political he's a talk radio host here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've always looked up to him as a very intelligent person. You know, he doesn't go hard right or hard left. He really tries to apply logic to things. And I asked him, I said, how did you get to a point where you were able to discern things the way that you do? And he really quickly just said, you know, I learned to quit getting in my own way. And maybe that's, you know, what this is all about. You know, some things you have to just allow them. I don't think that there's even really an easy way to try and say this. We could talk about it all night. You could write, you know, like a what was his name? Ezra Pound, you know, the famous poet, you know, his cantos, this long philosophical poetry that has this rhythm and this kind of theme throughout. You know, you could spend your whole life working on something like that to quantify exactly what we're talking about right now. But maybe what it just boils down to is, hey, why so serious? You know, don't let your seriousness and don't let your passion for what you're pursuing get in the way of the pursuit. Learn to enjoy the ride, so to speak.
Wow, how do you enjoy the ride when there's so many morons around?
You know, I'm not going to answer that.
That's a whole other subject. I mean, I'll tell you what where this stuff has led me is what's been kind of interesting. I got overwhelmingly sick of the UFO subject, despite the fact that I've been involved in it all this time, and strictly for selfish reasons. But that kind of piqued me into looking into the ghost phenomena and all of that, and I guess I'm a double duty offender because I've seen flying saucers both alone and with other people, and I've got fucking ghosts in my house and weird lights, and Jeremy's seen that, so you know it's not like you know I do connect, much like you've talked about that you wrote in your book, that you connect all these things together. You know, I do as well, and then when I came across Terrence McKenna actually on Jeremy's old message board from his singular days as a podcaster, that was when I was like, wow, you know, everybody is so quick to dismiss the psychological, if that's what this is. And if we're going to approach this in some kind of psychological manner, or even attribute part of it, like you were talking about earlier, the non-physicality of this stuff. I mean, you're talking about the Antichrist when it comes to at least UFOs, or even ghosts for that matter. And
I think it's actually Nick Redfern that's talking about the Antichrist with regard to UFOs. So.
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, there and let's be upfront. There's been plenty. I can think of one predominant UFO sighting, Elgin Air Force Base in Florida, that had an object at the end of their runway that was seen and photographed by servicemen. That was, I mean, this was a hardcore sighting, solid object, almost on the ground. And not a thing showed up in the pictures, but they all saw it. There's been plenty of ghost investigators that I've talked to over the course of the past year that have seen something. Yes, we had a camera set up there. We've got it. There's nothing on that camera. And so, you know, we're talking about the nature of human perception. And you know, that takes us into the whole other subject is, you know, it's amazing to me that, you know, even today, when I meet people and I'm talking to them and this subject, the paranormal comes up, and my wife just breathes a heavy sigh and goes, yeah, well, Jeff's pretty into that. And, oh, really? Well, you know, what part? And I say UFOs, and they go, okay, so here's a question for you. Is it real? And I invariably, 1 out of every 10 people I'll piss off because I'll say, well, that depends on what you mean by real. Mm-hmm. And so that takes us into a whole nother area that, by and large, this field doesn't want. And this has been kind of our, at least on this show, has been kind of our whining point, is that a lot of the paranormal fields want to kind of stay with the tried and true. It's almost like we're all watching Ghost Hunters reruns. We've got the investigation, the analysis, and the reveal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we get it. It's real. Now what? You know? Mm-hmm. So where do you think that you take a subject or subjects that are interconnected, that seem to be subjective in some cases and completely shared experiences in others, and also have a non-physical and a physical? Where do you go with that?
Oh, well, that's the $1,000,000 question, and it really is. And I mean
this in the sense of, how do you even begin to approach this? I mean, you can't really study this phenomena. This phenomena is not studyable. You've got to study the people talking about the cases. This is a study of people.
Yes, very much so. And I think that, especially with regard to UFOs and things like that, people, whether or not you endorse the theories proposed by someone like, say, Carl Jung, when he wrote Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky, it was pretty clear what Carl Jung's thesis was and how he interpreted ufology. And coming back to that earlier statement from Jerry Clark, who had said that, UFOs may represent something so far beyond us that trying to understand them, is like, an ant trying to understand nuclear physics. It actually does come down more so to to understanding the nature of humanity. Part of that is the inquisitive nature of humanity and whether or not it's something that we are capable of understanding, or if you want to think of things maybe in terms of this has a lot of implications, but something we were quote unquote meant to understand. I think it's human nature that people are curious and that they're going to endlessly, sometimes die for the cause of trying to unravel the mysteries of this world, of this existence, of our singular existence as a species, and of our inner selves. And for me, a lot of people don't like politics. A lot of people just aren't interested and can't relate to this sort of stuff when we talk about the supernatural. A lot of people, don't get into economics or finance, Others do. Everybody has something that interests them. Personally, I do find economics interesting, maybe because I'm a nerd, but, I find it very interesting. I like politics, I'm kind of a political junkie, and the supernatural and study of UFOs and things like that has always been something that has fascinated me. I personally get enjoyment out of it. Now, I do think also that in terms of geopolitical issues and things like that, UFOs are too often overlooked, and in terms of things that actually should matter to us. Matter meaning, how do we continue to survive as a species, and if our survival means, eliminating or at very best understanding things that could potentially be of danger to us, then we need to learn about them and accept them and understand them to the best ability, or to the best of our abilities, rather. I think that UFOs and the inherent destructive potential of craft that can outmaneuver any of ours and that can disable nuclear warheads in mid-flight and all this sort of stuff, that can emit radiation that literally causes people to develop, bizarre forms of cancer and die, as many, circumstances have actually, done. And this is something that has happened many times. Look up the Cash Landrum sighting or numerous others. The thing is that if there's a destructive potential there, it's something that should be looked at, which is kind of funny because I think that when it comes to approaching this sort of research from that mentality, it is both important, but nonetheless, as I said earlier, it's something that fascinates me. So where do we go with it? Well, I think we just have to be as logical. I know me personally, a lot of people, they do it solely for fulfillment. I know a lot of researchers, I can think of a few that probably really are doing this more for money than anything else. I know I don't. I get fulfillment out of being involved in this kind of chase, so to speak. I'm fascinated by it, and I like to unlock mysteries and try and unravel puzzles and things like that. And for that matter, I think probably my favorite literary character is Sherlock Holmes. So I think a bit of that's kind of reflective with regard to me specifically. But also, I do think that when it comes to what we find important, there are aspects of this research that I find important, and therefore I am also compelled to do it. So I can't speak for everyone. Where do we go? How do we approach it? And is it really dealing with anything more than just ourselves here? I think it is mostly the nature of the beast, and we are the beast. It is about human nature. But for me, it's something that I'm compelled and driven to do. And I won't speak for others, but I'm sure that and I'd hope sincerely that there are other people out there that, for the same reasons, are involved in this sort of research.
Well, how do you feel about, and this has been my notion that I've talked about on the show a couple of times now. Clearly, when we're talking about something like a trickster element in these things, it's a divergent. It's a dog and pony show. My old research partner said to me one day, "What would you do if you found out 10 years from now that this was all about folly, that this was nothing more than something to occupy you between birth and death? Would you be disappointed in that?" And I would say, well, obviously there's something out there that wants to entertain me, so I guess not. But I've kind of thought about the way this thing operates, and I've looked at the way people respond to it. I think that's what I'm more fascinated with than the actual reports anymore. The reports are similar and interesting and all of that, but it's become, you mentioned Cash Lantern, just for instance. You can name half a dozen other cases like that maybe weren't quite as intense, but
sure, yeah.
Can we regulate that kind of event to the phenomena? Not really, because we don't know. Mm-hmm. Likely that there was a military element to that following this thing around, almost says to a lot of people that this is probably a test flight of some kind of new aircraft that was going awry, and God knows what else has fallen into that category. So it's very hard to take a sighting even these days, or a piece of videotape, and say, well, that's definitely this phenomena, because, as UFO researchers like to say, we don't have anything that can do that. And that implies that what we have, which they don't.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think about all of this stuff mixed together. And so looking at how people react to it has become what I think is the most interesting part. And it seems to me, going along with the psychedelics, the altered states, in both abduction, UFO stuff, ghost stuff in some cases, it seems to me like what the trickster's protecting is what's after this life. And I think for any of us to say we're going to be able to solve this thing, you'll solve it when you take your last breath. I think that's when you'll find out. Mm-hmm. I think that's what is being protected here. I definitely get the sense that all of these diversionary things being thrown into the mix may be in part human behavior, but in some part seems to be deliberate. There seems to be a deliberance of yes, you're on the right track, lead you so far down the line, then cut you off and nothing, and you're left holding the bag going, what was that all about? And then it changes. My own experiences have changed drastically over the years, and have never been. I get the most nonsensical words out of these experiences, phrases and things that have been said that don't really make any sense to me at all. What do you say to that? Do you think there's any? Because going back to the DMT thing, you mentioned that at death, this is released in a massive way when people are dying. Well, it's also released in a massive notion when people are being born. At birth and death are the two highest rates of DMT dumps. And then you've got this whole notion of it's the seat of the soul. The pineal gland is the seat of the soul. So I refer to DMT as like the rocket fuel of the soul. Is all this stuff interconnected also with near-death stuff? In your opinion, are we looking at something that could be something we're not going to be able to realize in this form fully until we reach that other state after this?
Yeah. There's a distinct possibility. It kind of brings us back to the notion of what I mentioned earlier with regard to Bigfoot. And reports of Sasquatches disappearing. Brad Steiger specifically telling me about instances where he felt like he was hot on the trail of something, and then that something just disappears. And I've spoken to other people, who literally have said, I've always believed in these things. I don't know what to make of them. I've actually had encounters. I've seen one before, and the thing literally, decided to walk away, after I noticed it. And as it's walking away, it disappears, vanishes in mid-step. Funny thing is, people say the same thing about UFOs. Are they hallucinations? Or hallucinations, in a strange way, a part of the human physiology? Are we meant to hallucinate, much as we, some propose we do at the time of our birth and at the time of our death with these DMT dumps, like you mentioned, Jeff? It's a thing where I think that, yes, in a sense, it's almost as though some of this stuff is representative of not a continuous, valid phenomenon, but little fragments that hint at a phenomenon that we're just shown glimpses of at times. And see, at this point, it almost becomes a philosophical discussion. We are clearly talking right now more about the human experience than the actual phenomenon per se, because taking this, approach, the phenomenon is in itself part of our humanity. So I don't know. It's a different.
Well, it isn't as much as we perceive it. I mean, this is the part of it that I have a hard time getting people to understand when I'm talking about this, is that we can't really separate ourselves from this phenomenon. Like you talk about dissecting it, but we're always dissecting it through the goggles that we have on, because it's all we got, and clearly those goggles, as applied to like ufology or at least abduction phenomena stuff, it seems very clear to me, and I'm sure other researchers have said this, and I can't be alone in this, that these beings can alter perception in us like that. And so how are we to know what's being perceived, and therefore how to dissect the perception that we have? You see where I'm coming from with this?
I think so. And breaking it apart into the two elements there's the aspect of it that we can't control, and then maybe there's the part of it that we can control. We may not ever be able to control the way that this phenomenon appears to literally affect us, whether you mean physiologically or whether you mean spiritually or all of the above. What we can change, though, is that part of that perception knowingly has been built up by our own expectations and our own innate curiosity and our tendency to look for the next clue and anticipate what's going to come next. And therefore, again, I say we have crafted kind of the loose facade of a story, around what we hoped would be a middle, a climax, and a resolution, when in truth, if the nature of the universe is fairly chaotic, those things don't exist. And we have to look at separate phenomena individually and just say, hey, you know what? Unfortunately, we may not ever know the entire truth, but we may be able to learn more about these individual elements if we just try and break them apart and look at them. One's a perception that we can control to some degree, the latter of those two. The other, as you had mentioned, it's probably going to be something that will continue to fool us. It is so innately a part of us that we'll never understand it. But I know that, in terms of what we can and cannot do, one of those, thought processes, if you will, is something that we can control and manipulate. It's not too late. Most people just don't want to do it. The other is something we'll have to learn to live with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as at least alien abduction stuff goes, you have mentioned very early on in the show that, to dump the entire regression hypnotherapy line or typical scenario, let's put it that way, doesn't leave us with much. But in fact, there are a lot of people who remember experiences outright.
Sure.
And have you spoken to a lot of people who remember completely outright their entire experience or most of it? And how do you find that differs from the scenario of Hopkins, Jacobs, Lamb, so on and so forth?
I haven't spoken to that many people who have recalled their experiences outright. What's interesting to me is that a lot of the time, people who say that they remembered things without hypnosis they had recollections sometimes through dreams. Mm-hmm. And actually a good classic example of that would be, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. Here they observed a UFO craft in 1961. And they were traveling along. They actually, according to some sources, literally stopped their vehicle on a few occasions to observe this craft through binoculars, which immediately says to me that, when they got home and it was more than 2 hours longer, the drive home than it should have taken. I wonder if this could have also factored in, stops that they may have made and how long they had spent actually observing this object through binoculars as they had said that they had done. But all that aside, after the initial experience, there was no actual memory. Betty and Barney go home and gosh, can you believe those little guys? Boy, they were weird. They don't remember immediately the actual experience. Betty Hill, claimed that she had remembered, but through dreams. Can we actually call a dream a memory? This is something that I've noticed that a lot of abductees have talked about. They will say that, I began to remember through vivid dreams, but a vivid dream may be representative of something that actually happened, but in the truest sense, it's not a memory. When I lay down at night and I dream that I'm being chased through the woods by a Sasquatch, I doubt that is something that actually happened to me, but rather a dream that I'm having based on maybe something that I'm interested in. That's, as a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that that's 100% the case every time when I have a dream about a Sasquatch or something like that chasing me through the woods. Now, could I go so far as to say that people who might have an interest in UFOs might lie down and have a similar dream, and they begin to have reoccurring dreams about UFOs and things, begin to wonder, I wonder if I'm actually experiencing memories. And then they feel justified when their quote-unquote memories are, kind of verified through hypnosis that occurs later, which we may, consider bunk. I just, to put it all out there, I don't trust hypnosis at all. I don't want to disclude the possibility that repressed memories might resurface through hypnosis, but there are so many instances where, again, that's been found not to be the case that I don't look at that as something that's reliable in terms of research. So when we look at how that pertains to the early cases, Bud Hopkins, and keeping in mind that that there's the two influential books that came out in the 1980s, Communion and Intruders. But in Communion, of course, Bud Hopkins, was a key player there, and all this had to do with Whitley and Bud's abductees, the people who had come to him, undergoing hypnosis and recalling these events. In many instances, people who have said that they've had recollections, in truth, had these recollections via dreams that preceded the hypnosis, and I don't know that the dream aspect, in terms of considering that a valid memory of a real event, can be any more trustworthy than hypnosis. Now, that is not to say, though, that everyone who has claimed to have been abducted was either dreaming or was later hypnotized and made up the entire thing. But I'm telling you, in terms of people I've spoken to, I can't right off the top of my head think of one individual who said, I was on board that craft and I came back, they put me back in my room, I remembered the entire thing, it really bothered me, and I finally told my wife 2 days later, yada, yada, yada. I've never actually encountered a situation where someone said this, without a shadow of a doubt, is what happened, and I remembered it.
Well, we need to talk, don't we?
Yeah, that'd be good. But again, not to say that people don't say that. I'm saying I've not had people come to me and say that. I know that there are reports and that they exist.
Well, I mean, it's just, for me, the hypnosis, the whole hypnosis argument, I mean, right now for me, it's kind of a done issue, because I don't know how much more that can be presented about it. After the Lilienfeld show, I was pretty much summed up exactly what I thought about it over the years. Right. But, even as far as what you were talking about earlier about car accidents and this sort of thing, and maybe it being a valid tool for something like that. I mean, again, we're talking about something that is an altered state, and how can we use hypnosis? It's one thing to say, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Well, I don't remember. Well, lay back and count backwards from 10. You might actually remember what you had for breakfast. Then again, you might remember eating your cat. But at the same time, that's a real event that you did. You just can't quite remember or place what you ate. Whereas this is a much more broad experience. So this is a little harder to pin down than what you ate for breakfast or how long it took you to get to work this morning.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. So if we can't trust hypnosis because it's an altered state, how do we trust altered states of mind with DMT and the such?
You can't.
How do we say that those? How do we say that those reflect anything other than hallucination?
because other people see the same things.
Yeah, but
because
people report the same things under hypnosis.
Well, that's after contamination.
How do you know it's not after contamination?
Well, because the men in the Amazon drinking ayahuasca are painting flying saucers, and they've never had contact with Western civilization or our culture at all. So figure that out. I mean, there's no cultural contamination going on in the jungle, as far as that goes. And these men are painting. I mean, the one painter, he just passed away recently. I mean, his aliens and UFOs in the truest sense of what you think of as a machine in the sky, he painted with amazing detail, and this was not something that he was exposed to as far as popular culture is. And even when you're talking about DMT, I mean, parts of the experience at the onset. I mean, I don't think DMT has been that ingrained in culture, and even in the drug culture for that long of a time, in the broad sense of drugs or psychedelics. People were saying there are beings there, there are people there, there are entities there, and describe these. And again, it's an altered state, but we're talking about something that wasn't widely talked about. You didn't have leading questions going on. This is an experience that's being related. Nowadays, if you took DMT, would you go to the elf nest and be approached with all these little mechanical chattering beings? Judging that I've listened to Terence McKenna every night for the past year and a half, I would say I probably would. Would I trust that? I doubt it. I'm certainly polluted in that way. But I think, when it comes to hypnosis, that's a whole other bag. I mean, you're talking about something that's been all over the media, that's widely available in print. The first, I guess, being Betty and Barney Hill being one of the first ones. But, that whole scenario of the medical experiments and all that kind of stuff, I don't know of too many people who recall their experiences that I've talked to over the years that say it had any medical / sexual component to it at all, which I find interesting because I hadn't either.
What kind of things do they describe?
Usually a lot of geometric shapes. You'll get a lot of very, very bizarre visuals in the sense of people's faces changing, thinking that you're talking to one person when in fact you're talking to a being that doesn't resemble the person you started talking to. I had that. And I've had 3 or 4 other people tell me exactly the same thing. And these are in waking states, not asleep, that sort of thing. The relocation thing is a big deal. That seems to be really prevalent with a lot of people. They don't know how they got from point A to point B, but they certainly remember it seamlessly going from point A to point B, but the distance and the time doesn't make sense. And there's all sorts of other things that have come up. I can't say with any, I don't know that I can say with absolute consistency, but they have this familiar odor about them, that just all seems to speak to, I understand how I'm seeing this, but I can also turn my eyes to someone else's perception and say, I can see how you would view it that way. Again, these are very personal, tailor-made experiences, so finding continuity across any group of people is going to be slightly difficult. But there's definitely components of it that feel very familiar. And the DMT, this is what I recognized in what McKenna and Strassman were talking about. I'm like, wow, I do have those sort of elements going on here. So I don't know. I don't know how you can separate the altered states other than to say one seems to be a lot more contaminated than the other. And geologically we can talk about, how uncontaminated certain parts of South America are. But I
guess I'm at the point now where I want to make the argument that if we are embedded in this larger ecosystem or this larger environment that we have blocked out with structure, and so it takes being anti-structural to get through to us, or to pierce that veil or whatever, that we are actually right now living in an altered state of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why, the indigenous folks just sort of roll their eyes and go, boy, you guys just don't get it.
Well, and that's why that's why I like the alien experience, whether you're on DMT or whether you're sitting in your living room drinking coffee. That's why everybody describes this stuff as more real than real. Hyper-reality, that feeling of hyper-reality is terrifying. Because it's almost like you're asleep and someone's shaking you awake violently out of a dream. It's that kind of starkness. It's that, everything kind of has that lunar quality and you don't quite know what's going on. Am I having a stroke or, what's going on? But yeah, I mean, I think this is the altered state. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to that. I mean, I think we're living the delusion right now. So.
Yeehaw! Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah. Happy New Year. Welcome to the alternate universe, yes.
Right. That's right.
Well, Micah, you have generously stayed an extra 40 minutes or so.
Guys, if you have me on as a guest, I'm so used to that because, I call it mouth of the South, call it, diarrhea of the tongue, whatever you want to call it. My interviews tend to go long, but I'm always glad to stick around. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
Yeah, you as well. And tell everyone what your website is and what your book is one more time.
Oh, man. Well, it depends on which website you want to go to. I've got a new radio program I'm doing, the Micah Hanks radio program, and you can just go to Micah Hanks, M-I-C-A-H, Hanks like the actor Tom. It's MicahHanks.com. But the website I'm best known for is the Graylien Report, and that's Gralien report.com. And, of course, my book you can purchase there through the website, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, the Search for Sentient Intelligence from Other Worlds.
Very good. Thank you very much for joining us and staying extra long and closing out our year.
Oh gosh, yeah, this has been fun. This has been one of 2 year-end wrap-up shows I've done, and I'm just thrilled that people think enough of me to have me come on and discuss the entire summation of a year's worth of wonderful weirdness with them. So Jeff and Jeremy, let's do it again sometime, and you guys both stay in touch with me and everything. I've been following your work, and of course, I'll look to see more from both of you in the future too.
All right, sounds good. Micah Hanks.